So what is going on, guys? I am BlackOpsAmazing. Welcome back to another zombies video, where by request today we are taking a look at the story of Leroy, the giant in Buried. A lot of you guys have been asking me to do the story of videos on some smaller, lesser known characters in our zombies storyline. So expect more to come in the next few weeks, but I decided today that Leroy would be a very exciting character to make a story of video on. This is mainly because this is going to be a challenge. Really nothing is known about Leroy. We don't really have any facts on him. In fact, he is probably one of the most unknown characters in our zombie storyline. We literally have no story facts on him. So combining all of the clues and ideas, I think I've got a pretty exciting video for you guys today. So as always, if you enjoy it, a friendly reminder to leave a like rating. If you enjoy, it always helps out. Subscribe for more videos on the channel. Without further ado, let's get straight into the video. Enjoy. Many millenniums, eons of years ago, it was only the Keepers who existed. These manifestations of the ancients who were part of the Order of the Keepers, whose sole purpose was to protect the summoning key. However, one day it was the corruption from the Dark Ether that found its way into their realm. The Dark Ether twisted the minds of some of the Keepers, and it was then these twisted Keepers that waged war on themselves. And so now it was the corrupted Keepers fighting against the normal, uncorrupted Keepers. And this war waged on for a very long time. But eventually, the corrupted Keepers were defeated, and those who remained were banished into the Dark Ether forever. After this first war, the Keepers then ascended to become the guardians of all dimensions through time and space. After now knowing what was out there, they then became protectors if anything was to ever happen again. Meanwhile, in the Dark Ether, as time went on, the corrupted Keepers that had been banished there slowly morphed and changed into creatures that had tentacles, creatures that had 3 heads, creatures that looked nothing like their original selves. And these corrupted Keepers now barely resembled any former version of themselves. And so they became what we call the Apothicons. And so, for years and years, in the Dark Ether, these Apothicons began to morph, began to change, and build an army. Hundreds of years later, in the Middle Ages, although we don't exactly know the date, I'm going to say in the late 12th century, in the late 1200s, the Apothicons once again somehow found a way to re-enter creation and attack the earth. So now the second war between the Keepers and the Apothicons was on. But this time, it wasn't only the Keepers that were fighting against the Apothicons. In the 1200th century, it was also now human knights who were fighting alongside the Keepers as well. Both humans and Keepers fighting to defeat the Apothicons. Leading his people into the war, leading his kingdom into the war, was the Wolf King. Along with his hounds, his weapons, and the people of his kingdom, the king had a duty which was to help in the war against the Apothicons, and he would do this by leading his people into the war. And so the king, followed by his hounds, led his army into the deadly battle. It was unfortunate that that day many people died. The war was raging, the battlefield was scorched with fire, the Apothicons were causing havoc across the land. When all luck seemed to be running out on the battlefield, and the Keepers and the humans were being pushed back and killed by the Apothicons, suddenly, out of nowhere, 4 brave heroes decimated the Apothicon beast with their magic elemental staffs. These 4 heroes used their magic elemental powers to fight back against the Apothicons, with our 4 heroes now fighting along with the other Keepers and the king and the humans in the battle. They managed to defeat the Apothicons, pushing them back and banishing them. The Apothicons had gone and had once again being defeated. Now, the next part of this story for me really doesn't add up. From what I've found, there's really 2 sides. Now, either if we go by what the paintings show us in Der Eisendrache, it would seem that at the very end, the king is defeated. Richtofen will say, finally, number 4. Unfortunately, dear king, battling that particular evil only ever has one outcome. Takeo says no mortal could hope to achieve victory against such evil. Nikolai says this is not really uplifting story. Dempsey says outnumbered, outgunned, not even his big ass dogs could protect him. So this shows us that the king died fighting against that particular evil. that he died in the battle. Although you see him with his shield that we see him using in the battle, he's not wearing the same clothes. He's also not wearing the same hat. He definitely has 2 arrows sticking out of him, so he is dead. And like I said, Richtofen says that this is the king. But then on the other hand, if we go to the cipher we find in Gorod Karovi about the battle, it says, "While I consider myself to be a brave king in the battle, I will tell you, my son, that those 4 were the bravest warriors I have ever seen. I had the privilege to fight alongside them in the great battle many years ago, where we defeated the creatures from beyond and the Dead Eaters. They disappeared after we claimed victory, never to be heard from again. The last thing they told me was to build my castle here, in this very location, before they disappeared." This cipher tells us that they defeated the Apothicons, and it also tells us that the 4 heroes or premise characters told the king to build his castle on the very location where they were defeated. But how does this line up? If we see the picture of the king dead, this cipher very much tells us that he is alive. They've defeated the Apothicons, they have gone, the king is alive. Where we look at the picture, we don't know at this point if they've been defeated or not, but the king's clearly dead. If he's dead, how can our premise characters tell him to build a castle? And more importantly, how can he build it if he's dead? That doesn't make sense. If the king died in the battle like the picture shows us, then the war must have been still going on, so the Apothicons weren't defeated, and Primus could have never told him to build the castle. But clearly, this cipher says they were defeated, and they told him to build the castle. But in the picture, we see he's dead. I don't get this. You guys can let me know what you think about that in the comment section below, but I'm going to give you 2 different alternate endings here and try to make some sense of this. So let's say this is right and this somehow does make sense. Let's carry on with the story how I think it would go, because obviously this is going to relate to Leroy. So since we see the king wearing a different outfit in this picture, we could maybe assume that he actually died after the Apothicons were defeated. This is a different battle that he was fighting in. Richtofen says, "Unfortunately, dear king, battling against that particular evil never has one outcome." Takeo says, "No mortal could hope to achieve victory against such evil." Actually, none of the characters say which war he was fighting in. They don't say in any of these quotes for this picture that he was fighting at this particular point against the Apothicons. So maybe this picture is to represent a battle after the defeat of the Apothicons. Maybe this was against some other kind of evil. So let's just say that's the case. So after the Apothicons were defeated, 4 heroes before they disappeared told the king to build his castle. He builds his castle, and that's what we see in Der Eisendrache. This is the king's castle that he built. Unfortunately, like I've just said, it would seem from this painting that not long after building his castle, he would go to war again, but this time, unfortunately, without the help of our 4 heroes, he would die in the war. Now, at this point, you may be thinking, Eli, this is supposed to be a story of Leroy. How does he fit into this? Well, all of that was relevant because in this painting of our king dead, you can see Leroy bending down, crying at our dead king. Now, if you can't see this, you've really got to look hard because the painting merges everything in. You can see our big, giant Leroy leaning over, bending over, putting his head on the king's knee. He's got his dungarees on with the strap over his shoulder, and he's doing the same pose that he does in Buried when he is scared. Whenever we shoot Leroy in Buried, or we do something to scare him, he will run back in his cell, lock himself in, and then go into this crouched up pose. Now, why would Leroy be crying at the dead king? Was Leroy his servant? Was he just a follower? Was he someone that fought in the crusade? Was he someone that was close to the king? Was he a relative? We really don't know. But clearly, if he's crying for his dead king, he must have been close. Now, we know Leroy to be this dumb, big character. And actually, by his height, he doesn't actually seem human. You will see his different body formation, how tall he is compared to other people. I mean, we get tall people now. This guy is a freak. I'm 6'2". This guy's like 10 foot. If this guy's human, then I'm not human either. But this guy, although he looks human, he has human skin, he's just somehow different. And maybe because he was different, he didn't think like a normal person. So for that reason, he was close to the king. The king did something for him. Leroy had no friends, and seeing this as, you know, the king is giving me something, he thinks I'm special. For that reason, Leroy adored the Wolf King. He was very close to him. And so when he finds out that he's died, Leroy is obviously crying. And now, Once the king is dead, Leroy has no one. The king being his only friend, he now felt alone. So Leroy left. Although we don't know exactly where he went, on his journeys, he ended up in a town in the Old West, where he found himself locked up in a cell. Now, whether Leroy did something to deserve being locked in here, being the idiot that he was, he could have thought he was being nice, kind of like the story of George and Lenny and of Mice and Men. Think of Leroy as Lenny. He thinks he's doing things to be nice, but really he's harming people, getting himself in trouble, and in the end, Lenny gets killed. Or in this instance, Leroy gets himself locked up in a cell. Now, we don't know that, that's just a theory. He could have easily locked himself in here, being the idiot that he is. However, he finds himself locked in a cell in the Old West Resolution in the year 1295. And now we come up to the 2020s. Well, we don't exactly know what year we play buried in, but we do know it's in the future. We have futuristic weapons, so it could be anywhere from the 1990s to the 2020s. Either way, it doesn't really matter. When our transit team get to their final destination of buried, still there, locked in the cell, 700 years later, is Leroy. Now, this brings up the question as to how the hell has Leroy managed to stay and live in this cell for 700 years? From the second battle with the Apothicans in the 12th century to now in the year 2000. Now, like I said, Leroy's story is really unknown, so a lot of it's theory, but I have two what I think are very good theories on what has happened here and why we see this. Now, one, I said Leroy doesn't look human. You see by his size, by the way he is, there's something really off about this guy. Is there a chance that he isn't human? And if he isn't human, does he have the ability to actually live 700 years? It sounds very unrealistic. Or actually, in Buried, is it a coincidence that we have a piece of equipment that we only ever saw in Buried called the time bomb? We don't know where this piece of equipment comes from. We don't know who made it. We don't know anything about its background, how old this piece of equipment is. But what we do know is when we throw it and when we press the trigger, it has the ability to send us back in time. Is it a coincidence that we only ever saw it in this map? And actually, was this a hint as to how we actually see Leroy still locked in the cell in Buried? Somehow has someone managed to use a time bomb to reinvert what it can actually do, which is send you back in time, to get it to send you forward in time. Leroy, this character from the 12th century, this character who should have existed 700 years ago, someone, or maybe himself, has managed to use this time bomb to send himself forward in time to the 2020s, where he is still locked in this cage. He hasn't been here for 700 years. In fact, maybe he was even here for a few days or however long he spent here for. But within that time, the time bomb was used and sent Leroy into the future. And so what we are seeing is a character from the 12th century that really isn't supposed to be here, but because of the time bomb, he is. And also, Buried is an old western town. The Old West was in America, but actually the location of Buried is in Africa near Egypt. Buried isn't supposed to be here. This isn't its correct location. So again, could someone have used the time bomb and actually have also caused a divergence and somehow messed up the location? Using the time bomb caused this old western town to switch location and end up underground in Africa. Again, that's all theory, but actually we don't have any official explanation or really any information on it. I think it's very possible. However, we come to the 2020s with our transit crew. We find Leroy locked in this cell. We find the key, we let him out, and he doesn't really do much. In fact, he seems lost. He doesn't know what to do. All he will do is eat candy and drink booze, and if you give him candy or booze, he will help you out in some way, either by barging down a barrier or picking up and killing some zombies. But if Leroy gets hurt or if we accidentally shoot him, he will run back into his cell and slouch up in a fearful position. The exact same position that he was doing over the dead body of the Wolf King. When the Wolf King died, Leroy was scared, and when we shoot Leroy and he goes back into his cell, he is scared. And we can keep letting him out, and he will just help us along the way until we activate the final pylon in Buried, where we have two alternate endings. Either Maxis will take control, he will send Richtofen into a zombie, and he tells our transit crew that basically everyone on Earth is going to die. This would include Leroy, so it would mean in Buried, if this ending was what you chose, Leroy would eventually die along with the transit crew. Whereas if you did the Richtofen side of the Easter egg, Richtofen would take control of Samuel's body, or at least try to take control of his mind. Maxis would be banished and Samantha would be trapped forever, meaning she would eventually die. What would happen to Leroy, we don't know. It would probably mean he would still be trapped in his cell. I've gathered absolutely everything in this video and tried to make sense of it, but making a story of video on this character is extremely difficult when we have no information on him. We just have these little pieces left for us to kind of puzzle together, and I think I may have done a pretty good job on it. And thinking about this for a very long time, for me, this story, what I've just told you on Leroy, makes a lot of sense. I know there are a few different alternate endings or a few things that could change, but kind of piecing together what we have, we do kind of have a story on him. I think Treyarch have left this one up to us to discover and put together ourselves. Leroy was a friend of the king's, or maybe an admirer back in the 12th century, and when the king was killed in the battle, Leroy was, well, sad. He was crying over the dead body of the king, and so he ran away, got himself locked up in a cell in the Old West, or in an Old Western themed town, and from there was either locked in that cell for 700 years, or somehow used the time bomb or a convergence happened to send him into the 2020s, where he was freed by us, the transit crew, and buried, and then he helped us to do the Easter egg, and then after that he was either killed along with the transit crew, or he was more than likely still locked in a cell, left to either die or live on, depending if he's human or not. So there we go, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. This has been probably one of the most, this has been the most difficult story of video to make yet, but it's been a lot of freaking fun. I love finding out new stuff like this, and I cannot wait to bring you guys even more videos. Hopefully next time we'll have more clarity and a clear story on our other characters, and we should do. So stay tuned. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you haven't already, left a like rating, then if you could do that, that'd mean an awful lot to me. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Can we go for 1,000 likes on the video? Make sure you leave a comment letting me know your thoughts, and it'd be an interest to actually see what you guys think. I will see you in the next video. Peace out.